In the summer of 1994, a woman sat at the absolute center of Hollywood. She had just been named one of People magazine's 50 most beautiful people in the world. She had starred opposite Daniel Day-Lewis in one of the most visually stunning films of the decade. She had worked with Robert Altman, with Terry Gilliam, with Kevin Costner, with Jack Nicholson, with Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt. She had received a National Society of Film Critics Award for Best Supporting Actress, a shared Golden Globe, a shared Volpe Cup from Venice. She was 36 years old, dark-haired, with a presence so specific and so unusual that directors described her as someone the camera did not merely record but sought. The roles were arriving faster than she could consider them. The trajectory was clear. The future was obvious. And then she walked away. Not dramatically. Not because of a scandal. Not because the industry rejected her or a project failed or a relationship collapsed publicly and spectacularly in the way that Hollywood stories are supposed to collapse. She walked away because a child was born in 1996, and the moment that child arrived, Madeleine Stowe understood something about herself that the previous decade of extraordinary professional success had not fully revealed. The work was not the most important thing. She and her husband, actor Brian Benben, moved to a ranch in the Texas Hill Country west of Austin, near Fredericksburg. Not a weekend property, not a retreat, a ranch they actually lived on, in a part of Texas where the nearest city was a significant drive, where Hollywood was not a presence but a rumor, where a girl named May could grow up in something closer to ordinary life than the zip codes of Los Angeles permit. Madeleine Stowe essentially vanished from the industry that had been courting her for a decade, and she did it so quietly that for years, people in Hollywood weren't entirely sure whether she was retiring or simply pausing. She wasn't sure either, but the full truth of why she left, the psychological architecture underneath the decision, the childhood that had been building toward it for 30 years before she understood what it meant, is a story that has never been told completely. And it begins not in Hollywood, not on any film set, but in a working-class neighborhood of Los Angeles called Eagle Rock, in a house where the lights came on in the middle of the night, and the neighbors came running. Subscribe to this channel right now, because the story of Madeleine Stowe is one of the most quietly devastating and ultimately redemptive stories in the history of American cinema, and it has almost nothing to do with the movies. Madeleine Marie Stowe Mora was born on August 18, 1958, at the Queen of Angels Hospital in Los Angeles, the eldest of 3 children born to 2 people who could not have come from more different worlds. Her father, Robert Alfred Stowe, was a civil engineer from a poor family in Oregon, self-taught, practical, a man who built things for a living and who came from a background where the arts were not the native language of daily life. Her mother, Maria Mora Steinborth, came from one of the most prominent political families in Costa Rica, a lineage that included 2 presidents of the republic and a vice head of state. The Mora family had governed Costa Rica in the 19th century. They had shaped the country's institutions. They carried the kind of accumulated history that small nations produce and large families protect. The combination of those 2 bloodlines produced a girl who grew up in Eagle Rock, a working-class Los Angeles neighborhood of brick schoolhouses and double-feature matinees and neighbors who knocked on each other's doors at 2 in the morning without being asked, carrying inside her a paradox she would spend her entire life navigating. The grandeur of a family history she had not lived and the plainness of a neighborhood that asked no one to be grand. What shaped her most profoundly was neither of those things. It was a diagnosis. When Madeleine was 4 years old, her father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She has spoken about this with a directness that does not seek sympathy, but that does not flinch, either. Her father suffered terrible seizures in the middle of the night. She remembered, in an interview with Los Angeles magazine, the sound of those seizures and the neighbors running in to help. No questions asked, just presence, which she described as giving her a sense of community optimism despite the darkness surrounding it. She remembered washing her father when she was 8 or 9 years old. She remembered the whole family, her mother, herself, her 2 younger siblings, becoming organized around the task of anticipating his every move. Our whole lives became anticipating my father's every move, she told Brain and Life in 2015. It can leave you with a bit of post-traumatic stress disorder. I had all the symptoms and realized what it's from. That sentence is one of the most important things Madeleine Stowe has ever said publicly, not because it is dramatic, but because it is precise. Post-traumatic stress disorder as the product not of a single catastrophic event, but of years of chronic hypervigilance. of being a child in a household where the unpredictability of illness governed the emotional weather, where the ground shifted without warning, where safety required constant monitoring of another person's condition. The psychological literature on childhood caregiving describes exactly this architecture. The way a child who grows up managing a parent's crisis learns to orient themselves entirely outward, to subordinate their own needs to the needs of the situation, to become so practiced at reading external signals that their own internal ones go unheard. Madeleine Stowe grew up in that house, and she built the only escape available to a child in those circumstances. She went somewhere entirely alone, entirely interior, entirely hers. She went to the piano. At 10 years old, Madeleine Stowe began studying with a Russian-born pianist named Sergei Tarnowski, a teacher of the old school, deeply serious, with a tradition of training that ran back to the European classical conservatory world. He was already old when she found him. Ancient, really, in the way that certain musicians are ancient, not merely in years but in the accumulated weight of a tradition they embody and transmit. She would later explain that playing the piano was a means of escape from having to socialize with other children her age. This is the explanation that appears in most accounts of her childhood, and it is true as far as it goes. But in the context of what was happening in that house, the father with MS, the nights of seizures, the family reorganized around his needs, the piano was something more specific than social escape. It was the one place in her life where the terms were entirely clear, where the rules did not change without warning, where effort produced a predictable and controllable result. The music was hers. No one else's condition governed it. No one else's crisis interrupted it. In the hours at the keyboard, she existed in a world that made sense because she was the one making it. She practiced for hours every day. For 8 years, Tarnowski had faith in her that went beyond the formal relationship of teacher and student. She has described him as, in some sense, a father figure, the man who could read her through the relaxation of her wrists, who gave her a formal and demanding kind of attention that was different from anything available at home. As he aged and his own health declined, he continued teaching her from behind a trellis in his sunroom, seated where she could hear him but not see him, giving her, she said, some of the most beautiful lessons of her life from behind that screen. She knew, at the end, that it was ending. She described her last lesson with a vividness that suggests some experiences lodge so completely in the body they never leave. She sensed she would not see him again. She went to the trellis to say goodbye. Her mouth started to quiver, and she did not cross to the other side to embrace him. She stood at the boundary and then left. It was one of the real vivid moments of my life, she said, and one of the things I really regret. After Tarnowski died, she quit the piano. She was 18. She had also, she later acknowledged, understood by then that she was not quite good enough, that the standard required for a concert career was one she had approached but could not reach. But the quitting was not only about ability. I just felt it was time to not be by myself anymore, she said. 8 years of solitude at the keyboard. 8 years of retreat from the chaos of the house into the orderly world of music. And then, suddenly, the need for something else. The need for connection. For the thing she had been using the piano to avoid. She was 18 years old, and she had just had her first date. The isolation was over. Something was about to begin. Leave a like right now, because what Madeleine Stowe discovered next, and how it led her, almost by accident, into one of the most interesting careers the decade would produce, starts at a Beverly Hills theater where no one was expecting her. She enrolled at the University of Southern California to study cinema and journalism, which tells you something about where her mind was going even before she knew how to get there. She was not interested in her classes. What she was interested in was performance. The same fundamental problem she had been working on at the piano, translated into a different form. How do you take something interior and make it legible to other people? How do you communicate across the distance between one person's experience and another's? At the Solaris Theater in Beverly Hills, she began doing volunteer performances. Not for money, not for career strategy, because she needed to be on a stage. A talent agent happened to be in the audience. And in the way that the entertainment industry occasionally produces moments of genuine accident, that agent saw something. The specific quality of presence that cameras and audiences would later confirm, and got her a series of offers for television appearances. She made her debut in 1978 on the police drama Beretta. Guest appearances followed on The Amazing Spider-Man, Barnaby Jones, Little House on the Prairie. The work was modest, the kind of episodic television that fills a young actor's years without defining them. In 1981 came The Gangster Chronicles, an NBC miniseries, where she met the man she would marry the following year. Brian Benben was an actor, calm, private, someone who operated at a similar frequency to Stowe in his relationship to the industry and to public life. They married in 1982. They have been together for more than 40 years. In an industry where the dissolution of relationships is treated as inevitable and their endurance as remarkable, the Stowe-Benben marriage has been so consistently unremarkable, so determinately outside the circuits of celebrity coverage, that most people who know her work have almost no mental image of what their life together actually looks like. That is by design, and it is one of the earliest expressions of a philosophy that would eventually lead her to a ranch in Texas. The film career that developed through the late 1980s and early 1990s was, in several specific ways, an accident of accumulation. She was not working from a master plan. She was not, as far as the available evidence suggests, managing her image toward a particular kind of stardom. She was making choices that interested her and doing the work at the highest level she could bring to it, which is a less common approach than it sounds. Stakeout in 1987 was her first significant film role, a comedy opposite Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez that opened at #1 at the box office. She was not the reason for its commercial success, but she was a reason for its texture, a presence so specific and so different from the usual register of the romantic interest that the film remembered her long after the jokes had faded. Kevin Costner, Jack Nicholson, Kurt Russell. The late 1980s and early 1990s generated a specific kind of film. The thriller with erotic undertones, the crime drama with moral complexity, the historical epic, and Madeleine Stowe appeared in multiple iterations of all of them. She worked with Costner in Revenge in 1990. She appeared opposite Nicholson in The Two Jakes the same year. In 1992, she played opposite Kurt Russell in Unlawful Entry, a film about a couple terrorized by a corrupt police officer, which she approached with the same quality of controlled intensity that characterized everything she did. Nothing performed for the camera, everything inhabited from the inside. And then came 1992, and The Last of the Mohicans. The film, directed by Michael Mann and starring Daniel Day-Lewis, is one of the most visually extraordinary American films of its decade, an epic set in colonial America that managed simultaneously to be a period piece, a love story, an action film, and a meditation on what it means to belong to a place and a time that is already ending. Madeleine Stowe played Cora Monroe, an aristocrat from the old world who encounters in the new world both the wilderness and the man who embodies it. The role required a quality that not every actress can produce: the ability to convey, with the whole body and without melodrama, the experience of a person being fundamentally changed by what she is encountering. To make transformation visible without announcing it. She made it visible. The film grossed more than $75 million worldwide. It elevated her, in the industry's assessment, from supporting player to A-list movie star. People who had not previously known her name now knew her face. That specific dark-eyed, high-cheekboned, fully present face that the camera kept finding even when it was pointed at something else. Robert Altman, who was not a director known for casting arbitrarily, saw something in that face. He cast her in Short Cuts in 1993, his sprawling, interlocking ensemble film adapted from the Raymond Carver short stories, as Sherry Shepard, the wife of a compulsively lying and adulterous police officer played by Tim Robbins. It was not a leading role in the conventional sense. In an ensemble of this size, no role was. But Stowe brought to Sherry a quality of watchful, slow-burning awareness. A woman who knows more than she lets on, who has made her accommodations with reality and is quietly paying the price for them. That critics noticed and that the awards circuit confirmed. She won the National Society of Film Critics Award for Best Supporting Actress. The film shared a special Golden Globe and a special Volpe Cup at Venice for its ensemble. And in 1995, Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, the time travel film that paired her with Bruce Willis and a young Brad Pitt at his most ferociously unhinged, gave her what may be her most intellectually complex role. Dr. Catherine Railly, a psychiatrist who begins the film as the rational anchor of an irrational situation and gradually finds herself unable to maintain that position. The film was commercially successful and critically serious in equal measure, and Stowe's performance in it demonstrated a capacity for a very specific kind of screen intelligence, The kind that can make the experience of changing your mind look like the most dramatic thing a person can do. By 1995, Empire magazine named her one of the 100 sexiest stars in film history. People had named her one of the 50 most beautiful people in the world. She was being discussed as one of the most significant actresses of her generation. And she was already, without knowing it yet, moving toward the door. Subscribe to the channel right now, because the reason Madeleine Stowe walked away from the peak of that career, and what it cost her, and what she has said about it since, is one of the most psychologically honest accounts any actress has ever given of what Hollywood actually asked from the people it elevates. May Theodora Benben was born in 1996. Madeleine Stowe has described what happened in those first weeks with the simplicity that sometimes accompanies the most total experiences. She didn't think, "I'm retiring." There was no formal decision, no announcement, no press release. There was a child, and then there was a question that the child made unavoidable. What is the most important thing? She told People magazine in 2011, 15 years after May was born, "I never thought, I'm retiring, but I didn't feel that thing revving in me. I was much more focused on May." That phrase, that thing, is worth sitting with, because it names something real about the specific hunger that drives a serious performer toward the work. Not ambition in the generic sense, but a kind of internal engine, a revving, a pressure that builds when you are not doing what you are supposed to be doing and releases when you are. The actors who make the greatest choices describe it in similar terms across decades of interviews. The compulsion, the necessity, the sense that the work is not something you do, but something you are. Stowe felt that engine stop. Or rather, she felt it shift, redirect towards something that was not the camera, not the set, not the role. Toward a child who needed her present in a way that the industry does not accommodate. And she chose the child. She and Brian moved to a ranch west of Austin, near Fredericksburg, Texas. Not a temporary relocation, a life. They raised May on that land, in a part of the country where the rhythms are agricultural and the distances are vast, and the culture of celebrity does not penetrate in the way it does in coastal cities. Stowe has spoken of that period with an affection that does not romanticize the choice, but does stand by it. "It was frustrating at times," she admitted. "But now I see how she's turned out. I wouldn't have it any other way." The frustration is the part of the story that gets underreported. The choice was genuine and the commitment was real. But Stowe was not a woman without ambition or without the specific hunger she had described losing. She had merely chosen to subordinate it. And there are very few people who have ever subordinated something they genuinely loved without feeling the loss at some point, in some quiet room, in some moment when the question of what they might have done reconfigures itself in the dark. She felt it. She said so. And then she also said, without contradiction, that she would not have made any other choice. That is the most honest description of a specific kind of sacrifice that I have ever heard an actress give. Not martyrdom, not complaint, just the clear-eyed acknowledgement that the thing you chose cost you something, and that the cost was worth it, and that both of those things are true simultaneously. The years between 1996 and 2011 were not years of complete absence. They were years of selective and largely unsatisfying return. She made attempts. The proposition in 1998 brought her back to screens for the first time in 2 years. The General's Daughter in 1999 opposite John Travolta was commercially solid, but not the kind of work that reignited the engine she had described losing. We Were Soldiers in 2002 with Mel Gibson. Avenging Angelo the same year opposite Sylvester Stallone, which held a 13% approval rating and vanished without trace. A Fox pilot called Southern Comfort that never got picked up. A recurring role in a Jeff Goldblum detective drama on NBC in 2007 that was canceled after 2 months. A Lifetime movie in 2009. These are the credits of someone who has not stopped working, but who is also not working in the register that her talent requires. Someone who is showing up and doing the job without the engine running at the speed it used to run. Someone who has made a life outside the industry and is periodically testing whether reentry is possible, whether it still fits, whether the hunger has returned in a form that makes the return worth what it costs. The frustration she described was visible in those choices, not in any public way. She remained, throughout, determinately outside the celebrity press cycle, giving few interviews, maintaining the privacy that she and Brian had organized their life around. But in the pattern of the work itself, in the gap between what the projects were and what she had been capable of, there was a story being told. What she needed was not just work. She needed the right work. The role that would ask for all of her, that would run the engine at its proper speed, that would justify the return in a way that no Lifetime movie and no canceled NBC procedural could. It arrived in 2011 with a character named Victoria Grayson. Comment below and tell me, do you think Hollywood truly understood what it had in Madeleine Stowe during the 1990s? Or do you think, like so many actresses of that era, she was always one difficult choice away from being let go? The ABC drama series Revenge was, in its premise, a contemporary retelling of Alexander Dumas's The Count of Monte Cristo. A young woman named Emily Thorne, played by Emily Van Camp, arrives in the Hamptons to dismantle the powerful family that destroyed her father. Victoria Grayson was the matriarch of that family, the scheming, glamorous, morally bankrupt center of the Hamptons' social world, a woman of spectacular cruelty, and buried beneath it, a grief and a guilt that she had spent years transforming into armor. The showrunner Mike Kelly had wanted Stowe from the beginning. The network was not immediately convinced. She had been largely absent from screens for years. The question was whether audiences would accept her in a lead role on a major network drama after that long an absence, and whether she could play a villain of that specific texture, not cartoonishly evil, but comprehensively ruthless, which is a much harder thing to sustain. The network needed convincing. Stowe, according to her own account in a Variety oral history of the series, was not the path of least resistance. But Kelly held firm. And when the show premiered in 2011, Victoria Grayson became one of the most talked about antagonist characters on American network television. What Stowe brought to Victoria was everything she had learned about performing stillness, about the way the most dangerous people in any room are the ones who seem most composed, about how cruelty, when it is exercised by someone of genuine intelligence and genuine damage, is not performed but operated, coolly, precisely, with full awareness of what it costs the other person and a decision to pay that cost anyway. Victoria Grayson was not a monster. She was a woman who had made specific choices, specific compromises, at specific moments of her life, and who had then spent decades defending those choices with the only tools available to her: power, manipulation, and the kind of beauty that the Hamptons treats as a social currency. The engine ran. Stowe was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Television Drama Series in 2012. TV Guide nominated her for Best Villain. The show ran for 4 seasons, from 2011 to 2015. It was, by any measure, the most sustained creative success of her television career, the role that a generation of viewers who had been too young for The Last of the Mohicans would associate with her name. She played Victoria Grayson until the character died in the series finale in 2015. She confirmed to Entertainment Weekly that the death was final, that whatever flashback appearances remained, the character was gone. And then she stepped back again. But this time, the step back was different. She was not choosing between career and child in the way she had chosen in 1996. May was 19. She was not retreating from the engine, but operating it more selectively, in the way that people who have learned something about what they need from work are able to do, with the patience of someone who knows what the right project feels like and is willing to wait for it. There is a dimension of the Madeleine Stowe story that exists in the years between these professional chapters that almost no public account has fully examined, and it is the dimension that most completely explains the psychological through line of her life. The childhood with the father who had MS. The years of caregiving that she described as producing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The isolation at the piano that was both escape and survival. The struggle, at 18, to not be by myself anymore. To come out of the internal world she had built as protection and re-enter the human community she had been managing from a distance. And then, decades later, a trip to Haiti. In 2008, Madeleine Stowe traveled to Haiti for the first time. What she encountered there, the scale of poverty, the conditions of the people living in it, the specific quality of suffering that exists in communities where the resources are simply absent, activated something in her that she has described as transformative. The following year, before the earthquake that would devastate the country in January 2010, she became one of the founding members of Artists for Peace and Justice, a foundation established to address extreme poverty in Haiti through education, healthcare, and economic development. She joined the board of directors. She became an active spokesperson not in the celebrity vanity sense, but in the operational sense, someone who understood the work that needed doing and committed to helping do it. After the 2010 earthquake, When the foundation's work became more urgent and more visible, she was more present, not less. She traveled. She spoke. She used whatever currency her name and her presence carried to direct attention toward a community that the news cycle would find and then lose with its characteristic inconstancy. This is the thing that the entertainment coverage of Madeleine Stowe almost never mentions, and that is, in a very real sense, the most complete expression of who she actually is. She grew up in a household organized entirely around the needs of a suffering person. She learned, in that house, to subordinate her own wants to the requirements of someone else's crisis. She spent years at the piano learning to be alone before she learned, at 18, later than most people, that she needed other people and needed to stop using her interior world as the only reliable territory. And then, in the second half of her life, she found the form of human engagement that asked for exactly the combination of skills she had spent her entire life acquiring without understanding why. The caregiving orientation, the ability to sustain attention on someone else's need, the comfort with effort that does not produce immediate visible results. The patience learned at the keyboard, all of it redirected toward a community of people in the most visible possible need. She told an interviewer once about her father's illness that despite everything, despite the post-traumatic stress symptoms, despite the childhood rearranged around his decline, she had come to believe something specific about the experience. "I'm always trying to find ways around obstacles," she said. "I don't believe things are impossible. And that, to me, has been a beautiful byproduct of my father's misfortune. In my heart, I truly believe that there is a solution to everything." A beautiful byproduct of her father's misfortune. It is a sentence that has required decades of living to reach. And it is also, when you sit with it, one of the more unusual things a person can say about the defining suffering of their childhood. Not that it was worth it, not that it didn't hurt, but that something came from it that would not have come any other way. Something she could not have arrived at through comfort. Share this video with someone who thinks the story of Madeleine Stowe is simply about an actress who stepped away from Hollywood, because that is approximately 10% of what actually happened. In September 2015, while she was still working on the final season of Revenge, Madeleine Stowe was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of someone moving through her master bedroom in her Los Angeles home. She went to investigate. In her bathroom, she found an armed man who pointed a gun at her neck and demanded valuables. He took a jewelry collection estimated at approximately $75,000 and left. The incident was reported by TMZ and law enforcement. The man was arrested in January 2016 during another robbery. It went largely unremarked in the broader coverage of her career, absorbed into the general noise of celebrity news cycles that move so quickly they register genuine terror and then immediately release it. But for someone whose childhood was already characterized by the hypervigilance of a caretaker, by a system of attention always oriented toward threat, always listening for the sound that meant the ground was shifting, an armed intrusion in the night is not simply a crime statistic. It is a reactivation, an event that lands on an existing wound with the specific force of the familiar. It is the night seizure, adult size. She did not speak publicly about the psychological impact of the assault in any extended way. She would not, because that is not how she operates. The privacy that has characterized her entire public life did not suspend itself for that. But it is part of the story, part of the texture of a life that has never been as smooth as the photographs suggested. After Revenge ended and after the assault and after May grew up, Madeleine Stowe continued to do what she has always done: wait for the right project and do the work the right project required. In 2019, she appeared in Netflix's musical drama series Soundtrack as Margot Weston, an actress. The casting feels almost autobiographical, whose relationship to her own past and to the people she has loved is central to the show's emotional architecture. The show was canceled after one season. It was not the platform she had hoped for. And then, in 2025, HBO's It, Welcome to Derry premiered. A prequel series to the blockbuster Stephen King adaptations, set in 1962, exploring the history of the fictional town of Derry, Maine, and the specific horror that has always lived there. She plays Ingrid Kirsch. The show received the kind of attention that HBO's prestige productions command, and Stowe's presence in it represented the most complete return to major platform visibility since Revenge a decade earlier. She is 67 years old. She lives now in Memphis, Tennessee, in the historic Midtown neighborhood of Chickasaw Gardens. Not Los Angeles, not New York, not even the Texas ranch where May grew up. Memphis, a city with its own complicated and layered history, a place that does not announce itself as an actress's natural habitat, and that perhaps for exactly that reason suits her. In November 2025, she was photographed in Los Angeles during a low-key outing with her daughter May. The photographs circulated in the entertainment press with the specific quality of attention that rare sightings generate. The slight collective surprise that she still exists, that she is still here, that she did not, in fact, disappear in any permanent sense, but simply organized her life around priorities that the camera had stopped following. May Theodora Benben is 29 years old. She looks, the photographs show, remarkably like her mother. What is the true story of Madeleine Stowe? It is not a tragedy, though it contains tragedy. It is not a cautionary tale about Hollywood, though it contains something instructive about the industry and what it does and does not value. It is not the story of a woman who couldn't hack it or who was pushed out or who made the wrong choices at the wrong moments. It is the story of a girl who grew up in a house organized around suffering and who learned to be alone as a survival strategy and who emerged from that solitude into a career that asked everything of her and that she gave everything to, for a period, and who then made a choice that the entertainment industry interprets as disappearance, but that she understood as clarity. She said it herself, in the plainest terms available. She didn't feel the engine running. She was more focused on May. That is the whole story, in 2 sentences. Everything else is the architecture underneath it. The father with MS, the piano teacher behind the trellis, the hand she didn't reach across to hold, the decade of solitude at the keyboard, the marriage that lasted 40 years while other marriages dissolved, the ranch in Texas, the work in Haiti, the gun in the bathroom in the middle of the night. The character of Victoria Grayson holding a room together with nothing but composure and contempt, and a daughter who walks through Los Angeles in the November sun looking like her mother. The camera found Madeleine Stowe at a Beverly Hills theater when she was barely 20 years old, and it recognized something in her that it took the rest of the world a little longer to name. She was someone for whom the distance between an interior life and an exterior one was very small, who communicated across that distance with an efficiency so natural it looked effortless. What the camera did not capture, because cameras never capture the most important things, was the interior life itself. The years of loneliness at the keyboard. The father she washed when she was 8. The teacher she couldn't bring herself to embrace before he died. The post-traumatic symptoms she recognized and named decades after acquiring them. The choice, made with full awareness of its cost, to disappear from the thing she was best at because something else was more important. She will tell you she never thought of it as disappearing. And she is right. Disappearing is what happens to people who are running from something. Madeleine Stowe was running towards something. The same thing she had been moving towards since she said goodbye to the piano at 18 and went looking for the world she had been using music to avoid. She was moving toward other people, toward the child on the ranch, toward the families in Haiti, toward the marriage that outlasted everything Hollywood predicted for it, toward whatever Memphis means to her now, in a historic neighborhood in a city that carries its own weight of history, far from both the cameras and the questions. I just felt it was time to not be by myself anymore. She said that about the piano at 18, but it turns out it was the sentence that described her whole life. If this video changed the way you think about what it means to step away from something, and about what it costs and what it gives back, subscribe to this channel. We tell the real stories here, the full ones, the ones that don't end at the last film credit. Leave a comment below with what you think the Madeleine Stowe story is really about. Is it about Hollywood's failure to hold on to its most interesting women? Is it about the impossible math of being a serious artist and a fully present parent simultaneously? Or is it about something simpler and harder, a woman who knew, earlier than most, what actually mattered? And share this video with someone who only knows her from The Last of the Mohicans, or 12 Monkeys, or Revenge. Because those films are extraordinary, but they are not the story. The story is the woman who made them, and the life she chose instead, and the fact that on a November afternoon in Los Angeles in 2025, she walked down a street with her 29-year-old daughter and didn't look like someone who had lost anything. She looked like someone who had kept exactly what she meant to keep.